We're going to finish up 6-4. Today we're going to graph the tangent graph. We will not be graphing the cotangent graph in Algebra 2. You will graph the cotangent in pre-calculus. So this will be the last trig graph that we're going to do. Now, keep in mind when you're doing your homework, you could use your graphing calculator. You could key this in, hit the y equals button, and you could put these equations or these functions in your calculator to check your homework. However, the test on Thursday is no calculator. So you also need to memorize the unit circle. So if you have not memorized the unit circle, the test is going to be impossible for you. Okay, so make sure you're memorizing the unit circle. I'm going to be giving you a blank one the day of the test. My advice to you is to fill in that blank one. Use that as your scratch paper, and then you'll be able to answer the first, I believe, 12 questions, which are multiple choice. Now remember, if the angle that I'm giving you is not on the unit circle, that's when you're going to add and subtract the 360, which is 2 pi, to get it to an angle that's on the unit circle. Now you will also have 3 graphing questions, and again, those graphing questions will change throughout the day within the class. A period may have sine, cosine, and tangent, and you guys may get tangent, secant, and cosine. They'll change throughout the day. We'll also change speeds or amplitudes. So talking to someone from another class isn't going to help you, because we will definitely give each class a different graph, and it's easy to switch those up. So my advice to you is memorize that unit circle. Practice it. There is a blank one on Canvas. Practice filling it in. All right, so on to the tangent graph. Now, I'm not going to use this grid. All right, so for the tangent graph, I'm not going to use this. I'm just going to draw it by hand. All right, but before we get to working with this tangent graph, let's refer back to our X and Y axis here. And again, these wonderful 4 first order pairs. So the 1, 0, the 0, 1, the negative 1, 0, and the 0, negative 1. Remember the angles that are associated with each of these axis points. Over here is 0 and 2 pi, which is 0 and 360. Up at the top is the pi over 2, or the 90 degrees. Over here is pi, and then down here is 3 pi over 2. Now remember, if we went counterclockwise, or if we went clockwise, this is also negative pi. This would also, or negative pi over 2. This would be negative pi. This would be negative 3 pi over 2. And then this is also negative 2 pi if you went clockwise. All right, so let's go ahead and figure out what the tangent is for each one of these angles that are along my axis. So remember, tangent is going to be y over x. So if I said to find the tangent of 0 degrees, again, it's y over x. 0 degrees is going to use this order pair. So y over x is 0 over 1, and I get 0. So the tangent of 0 equals 0. This is going to be our important first point that we're always going to put on our graph. Then if I did tangent of pi over 2, or negative 3 pi over 2, again, it's y over x. So if I come here, pi over 2 uses this order pair. So this one ends up being 1 over 0, and this is undefined. Over here, for pi and negative pi, they're going to use this order pair. So tangent of pi, again, y over x, 0 over negative 1, and that one also gives me 0. If I did tangent of 3 pi over 2, This one's going to use this order pair. Oops. Up here. And again, if you do tangent of 3 pi over 2, this is 1 over 0. And again, it's also undefined. So now let's go ahead, and now that we've established this is how we can get some points, we can also do this from any of the other points that are on our unit circle, like tangent of pi over 4. Okay, I told you to memorize that that equals 1 because pi over 4 is 45. We can divide the y by the x's to get any of the other tangent values. So let's go ahead and also talk about the length of the period or the length of the cycle for tangent. Remember, for cosine, sine, cosecant, and secant, the normal cycle length was 2 pi. For tangent, it's going to complete its cycle in pi. Now, remember when there's a speed change, we would always take that cycle length and divide it by b. And the b is going to be the number that's in front of x. So now instead of 2 pi dividing by that number, I'm going to be doing pi divided by the number that's in front of x. Now for this first graph, the number in front of x is 1, so I don't have a speed change. This is just my basic tangent graph. So let's go ahead and let me draw in my axis here. Actually, let me do it in black and then I'll add colors to my graph. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so remember on this one I told you the cycle length is pi. Now we are not going to do any shifts with tangent. We're only going to change the speed. So what we're graphing here is y equals tangent of x. So for my basic graph here, I just told you that the period length here is going to be pi. So I need to break this into quarters. So I do pi times 1/4, pi times 1/2, pi times 3/4. This becomes pi over 4, pi over 2, 3 pi over 4. Now, what we're confusing some people is they think that this is the first point, but this is the last point. And if it helps you, just take that pi and multiply it by 4 over 4, which is 1. My last point, when I'm labeling my x-axis, is the pi, which is what I had up here to begin with. So let's go ahead and label it, and it's like a reflection on the other side. So this will be pi over 4, pi over 2, 3 pi over 4, and pi. Over here, negative pi over 4, negative pi over 2, negative 3 pi over 4, and negative pi. To simplify this, I'm going to pretend like this is the display on my graphing calculator. And I'm going to make it like a window or the little display on my calculator. So I'm going to outline where I want my tangent graph to be. Now remember, the normal cycle is from 0 to pi or 0 to negative pi. So this is my window if I were to look at this on my graphing calculator, where I'd want to see my tangent graph. So this is the only place that I'm going to make my tangent graph. Now, if you recall back from those x and y axis points, tangent of 0 was 0. And then if I add in, this didn't have an amplitude, so I'm going to label this as 1 and negative 1. If you recall back from chapter 5, I told you to memorize that in this case, the tangent of pi over 4 or tangent of 45 is 1. So I'm going to come up here, put a point here. Tangent of negative pi over 4 would be negative 1. Good? Now, just like the other graphs, we have asymptotes. So if you recall, at pi over 2, it was undefined. So this is where my vertical asymptote is going to go. Now, by drawing my box or my window around my graph, the vertical asymptote is always going to be the second point that you've labeled on your x-axis. It's always the middle of in between the y-axis and the outside of my window. What you're going to do is you're going to first box your window, then you're going to draw in your vertical asymptote, which is going to be the second point along your x-axis to the left and to the right. And then again, the shape or the behavior that the tangent graph takes on is the same shape that the x cubed graph takes on. So if you recall, the x cubed graph looks like this. Or if we have a negative amplitude, then it's going to flip and it's going to take on this shape. So what we're going to do is we're going to graph the middle. It's always going to be at 0, 0. And then from there, it'll either go up to the amplitude at that first point. In this case, there was no amplitude, so I make it go up to 1. So the middle of my graph here is going to go up like this, and it's going to skim along that asymptote. And then over here, same thing. Then the points on the edge of my window, it's going to imitate the graph that's in the middle. So over here at the pi, this one's going to come down. Notice this side is out of my graph, so I don't need to show it. So it's just repeating the same type of graph that you put in the middle. Over here, when I graph this one will go up, skim along the asymptote. This one's out of my window, so I don't need to show it. So any of the yellow I don't need to show. The only thing I needed to see is the red. Now remember, for tangent, there is no restrictions. So remember, sine and cosine needed to be fractions, less than 1 and greater than negative 1. And cosecant and secant had to be greater than 1 and less than negative 1. That's why we made those u's. However, tangent can be any number, so there's no restrictions here. Oh, this one is just a screenshot from your textbook explaining this. Now, in your textbook, it doesn't tell you to draw the window. This is just something that I think helps to make the tangent graphs a little easier. So let's go ahead and, again, I'm not going to use this. So this particular equation has an amplitude of 2, and this 4 is a speed change. This means it's going to go 4 times as fast. It's going to go faster. So again, remember, the normal cycle is pi. This 4 is your b. So we're doing pi divided by b. So I'm doing pi divided by b, which is 4. Now my cycle, instead of being completed in pi, which is 180, now I'm going to be able to complete it in pi over 4, which is 45. So this is a lot faster. Now again, we need to get the 4 points. So again, remember, you're going to take pi over 4. You're multiplying it by 1/4. Essentially, it's 2/4, which is 1/2. Pi over 4 times 3/4. And then lastly, pi over 4 times 4 over 4, which is what we're actually starting with. Again, what you're starting with is the last point, or the end of our period. So here, pi over 4 times 1/4 is pi over 16. This is pi over 8. And this is 3 pi over 16. These are going to be my 3 points that I'm going to label along my x-axis. I'm going to take these same 4 points and make them negative on the left side. So let's go ahead. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So here, I'm going to label this as pi over 16, pi over 8, 3 pi over 16 and pi over 4. Same thing on the left, but they're negative now. So let's go ahead and make our window. Now we also have an amplitude, so we could add that in here. So let's add in a 2 in the negative 2. And now let me frame my window here. So from the negative pi up to pi over 4 to the positive pi over 4. This is where I want to see my tangent graph. Remember, tangent of 0, we're going to start here at 0, 0. Now at pi over 16, I'm going to go up to the 2 and the negative pi over 16 down here. Also draw in your asymptotes, which are going to be the second point or the middle of your box. So a vertical asymptote at pi over 8 and negative pi over 8. Again, the tangent graph takes on the shape of the x cubed graph. So I can go ahead and connect this over here. Skims along the asymptote and then over here. And then again, you're going to put points on the edge of your box. This one will go down. This is out of the box. We don't need to see it. This one goes up. This one's out of the box. I don't need to see it. All right, the next one. This time my speed change is 1/2. So this one's going to go slower. So I'm going to take my pi. I'm dividing it by the 1/2. So this becomes really pi divided by 1/2. Keep change flip. So this becomes, my cycle is now going to take me 2 pi. So again, I take 2 pi, multiply it by 1/4, 2 pi times 1/2, 2 pi times 3/4, and 2 pi times 4 over 4. These will be my 4 points. So 2 pi over 4 simplifies to pi over 2. 2 pi over 2 is just pi. This becomes 6 pi over 4, which becomes 3 pi over 2. And then here, 8 pi over 4, which is the full 2 pi. So these are the 4 points I'm going to label along my x-axis. Notice I also have an amplitude of -3. Go ahead and put these on. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pi over 2. Pi. 3 pi over 2. 2 pi. Negative pi over 2. Negative pi. Negative 3 pi over 2. Negative 2 pi. Amplitude of -3. So 3 and -3. Let me go ahead and make my viewing screen here. Pretend like it's my calculator screen. Let's make a window. Let's make a box. We can draw in the vertical asymptote. It's going to go on that second point or halfway in my box. So I have a vertical asymptote at pi and negative pi. And now this time, because the amplitude is negative, at pi over 2, I'm going down to -3 because of the negative amplitude. At negative pi over 2, this one goes up this way. So now the behavior looks like this. And down. And then the points that are over here on the edge of my box, it's behaving the same way as the middle. I don't need to see the yellow. I only need to see the red. -3, okay. For example, on the test, you're not going to be, doing colors. You could draw the whole thing and just, scribble over the part that you don't want me to see, or pretend like it's not there. So this one's going slower. It's going half as fast. Again, when there's a negative amplitude, it's looking like the negative x cubed graph. So for the tangent graphs, we're only going to change the speed and add in an amplitude. We will not be shifting the tangent graphs left or right. We're not going to graph the cotangent. That will be done in pre-calculus. So your homework is 4 problems, 21, 23, 25, and 29. So I will be getting a test review also posted for you. However, your homework tonight are just these 4 problems. Any questions?